Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Autistic Tidbits and Tangents podcast. I am Maja. I'm an autistic psychologist and author from Denmark, and this is my co-host, Kara Diamond.
I'm an autistic teacher. I almost said teenager. I'm an autistic teacher and university lecturer from Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, and today we are joined by Dr. Alyssa Hilary Zisk. And Kara, would you like to tell us about?
Yes, I would be delighted to tell you about Alyssa. So I connected with Alyssa because they wrote one of the best articles we're going to talk about a little bit later that I actually used in my university course because I loved it so much. And so I reached out to them to see if they wanted to talk on our podcast. So Alyssa is a neurodivergent researcher with too many research interests and no intention of actually narrowing it down. Hence, they're perfect for this podcast. Right now, most but not all of their research has to do with augmentative and alternative communication, also known as AAC, as part of their work with AssistiveWare. Outside of research, Alyssa is a math teacher with the art of problem solving, occasionally a neuroscience teacher at the University of Rhode Island, and an improviser at the Contemporary Theater Company. They are also on the admin team of the Facebook group, Ask Me, I'm an AAC user, 24-hour rule. So, Alyssa, welcome. Today we're just going to talk about a whole bunch of things related to your work and your interests. And I think we're ready to roll the intro.
Welcome to Autistic Tidbits and Tangents.
Candid conversations between autistic off-hour professionals.
Cool. Trigger warnings for this episode include discussions of ableism, as always, and also discussions of how especially people of color can encounter racism in cross-cultural meetings.
So, Alyssa, you have done so many things. You wear a lot of hats, it sounds like. Yeah, exactly. What inspired you to go into AAC work?
So, I am autistic and I can speak most of the time, and including right now, as you can probably hear, but not all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I use a variety of handwriting-based and typing-based tools to communicate when mouth words are either not working at all or technically possible, but not really going to communicate everything that I'm after. I took a graduate class on AAC while I was working on my doctorate in neuroscience. It was an elective that would count, and I was interested. I discovered that despite the name being augmentative and alternative, not just alternative, the vast majority of the focus is, in fact, on alternative, on people who do not speak basically at all, or who very few people can understand when they speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I, at that point, basically went, okay, so there is zero research applicable to people who use AAC for reasons similar to me. I guess I need to fix that now.
I love that. I also, tangentially, of course, in my course on accessible education and neurodiversity, one of my graduate students shared about the Lilu app, and it is an app that they use when they have trouble putting words, mouth words coming out of their mouth. I can't even bring mouth words out of my mouth right now, but I just thought, what a cool tool. So we introduced that to the entire group as an app because it's so important for people to know about. Like, I certainly experience situational mutism, times that I can't get out words, especially if there's any stress or conflict. And like, we need to normalize that people should be able to communicate however works best for them. Yeah. Yeah.
I find that it's so often that it's autistic people, it's neurodivergent people that come up with really the strategies and the tools that we need. Everything that's kind of built by someone else is usually to solve their problems with communicating with us. So whenever we need some way of actually getting who we are or what we want or what we need across, we have to build the tools ourselves.
Thank goodness we are an innovative peoples.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a few years back with AAC stuff, there was a meme going around of take a picture with your most used communication board. So I actually went into one of the classrooms at my university because at that time, my most used communication board was actually the side whiteboard that was within reach of one of the student one chair in the student seating area.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I wrote, "This is my most used communication board" on that whiteboard. Yeah. And took a selfie with it.
I love it. Now, I mean, this is sort of being tangential again, but how do you think we utilize AAC better in schools? Like, is there a way that we can get this across to teachers, how they can be open to forms that they don't know about, forms of communication that they don't consider?
I think that because people who use AAC have often been so, and are still so segregated a lot of the time, many of the general education teachers have literally just never seen it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak to the level of having encountered it before at my high school because through K through 12, the answer to the times when speech was not going to work for me was in fact to not talk.
Mm-hmm.
But in college, it took multiple revisions of my accommodations wording to even get it to the point where professors reading what my accommodation was even understood that it was something to do with like real-time communication.
Like,
wow.
That baffles the wording of the accommodations doesn't actually make it clear why you need the accommodations. Like,
I mean, do people explain why extra time on test is an accommodation given at the university level, or does it just say they get extra time on test? Yeah. This wasn't them not understanding why I need it. It was them literally not understanding what the accommodation meant I got to do.
Oh my goodness. So what were the, like, what are good accommodations then? Like, what did it end up looking like for you?
Oof, I should have pulled this up ahead of time because I have it saved. Let's see. Disability services.
Yeah, because I know, like, I mean, some universities are better than others. Accommodations can be so hard to access, and especially appropriate ones. I think this is
I didn't have any problems with getting what I needed once people understood it,
yes,
what it was and why I was asking for it.
Yeah.
But
I think it's an issue across universities, actually. Also, just getting access, even with a diagnosis. I certainly found with any dispositions that, or with any, see, I'm having trouble with mouth words as well. With any like compensatory things that I needed to get through, mine was like, no, you can't have that. It doesn't fit into the box.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't have problems with that, thankfully. My
That's good.
primary problem was that while professors were perfectly willing to accommodate, and in many cases were like, you need paperwork to get to do that? Once they understood what I was actually asking,
Mm-hmm.
it was that the only example that they were familiar with in many cases was Stephen Hawking, and that's not a connection they were going to make.
No.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
So my final accommodations wording read, use of alternative communication method in class.
Mm-hmm.
At times, this student may need to utilize an alternative communication method for in-class participation. The student should consult with the course instructor to determine the most effective method on a course-by-course basis. In practice, what that actually meant was the student should go show the instructor an assortment of tools that the student may actually uses, and then look at the classroom setup and say, most likely I will use this one.
Yes.
Because they don't have enough, they don't know enough to tell me which one they think will work best in their classroom. I'm the one who knows to do that.
And that's the thing with, I mean, I understand why the burden of proof, so to speak, falls to us when advocating for ourselves and what accommodations we can have, but it is so much work, especially like most of us have executive functioning difficulties and have to like fill out all the forms and put in requests and manage all the emails and phone calls to get the things. It is a nightmare.
Oh my God. There was no procedure.
Oh no.
Or how do you get accommodations for your dissertation defense?
That's baffling.
Wow.
Well, it's not a written exam, and the bulk of the exam, and the most common accommodation is extra time on tests in a quiet room. That's not relevant to a dissertation defense.
So can I ask what accommodations helped for your defense?
Literally just my regular accommodation of, at times, this student may need to use an alternative communication method.
Yeah.
I asked for that, and in recognition of the fact that I speak more quickly when speech is working for me than I type or write, I agreed with my committee that if I actually wound up needing it, they could have more time to grow me.
Okay, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. As it happened, speech continued to work throughout, and they did not take more time to grow me, but getting it set up, this was the same agreement for my oral comprehensive exams. Yes. Getting it set up for those two things, there was no procedure.
Yes.
We had to make up the procedure.
Look at you paving the way.
That puts so much pressure on you, though.
I tracked down 3 different deans.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is so much pressure, but hopefully you paved the way. Hopefully there's now a little bit more awareness, at least amongst your committee members, but hopefully the if they have a department of accessibility services or disability services.
Their disability services is, they never argued with me about my accommodations. The biggest challenge that we had was that we had to keep workshopping the wording on a new to the system accommodation. Like this, the version that I said out loud to you before was the final wording.
Mm-hmm.
They added that accommodation to the system 3 different times.
Wow.
Trying to get the wording to work.
Congratulations, though, because it's there now. It's there now to help other people.
Oh, yeah. Disability services obviously can't tell me if anyone else has used it since, but I was actually contacted by a student who felt the need to tell me that they had used it. So
that makes me so happy.
there was at least one other person who's used it since.
Yes. Well, like I said,
So
you're
is
paving
that-
the way.
Is that at that particular university, or do you know if
Yes.
universities will communicate and actually spread those things around? Because I think in my country, they probably don't.
I don't think that they're required to spread things around, but I know that some level of back-channel communication exists between disability services type departments because my disability services counselor shared one of my papers on those channels and told me about it.
Awesome. Look, I love it. I love it so much. I hope that this has like not a trickle down effect, because I don't want it to be a trickle down. I want it to be like a waterfall effect. Spreading information about, very reasonable and necessary accommodation, right?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I also want to talk a little bit about cross-cultural communication, which I know is another topic that you've written on. Now, you wrote, this is part of the brilliant paper that is thing of the day later, but you wrote about how it felt to be abroad in China. I'll get you to tell me a little bit about it, and how people were more willing and able to accommodate for any communication differences because of the language barrier than when you are, in the United States in your first language. I assume first language. I think you also speak other languages.
English is my first language. It is my primary day-to-day language. Mandarin Chinese with simplified characters is my second language, and it is one that I can basically function professionally in as long as I have access to like a dictionary.
Yeah.
Preferably electronic, because that'll be faster. Mandarin Chinese with traditional characters, I will be much slower than with simplified, but I can do it. And I have a few words in Yiddish, and I have just enough Hebrew to want the plural of Lugia to be Lugiot.
I love it. Okay. So yeah, tell us about China and your experiences communicating there.
So when I was in China, a great deal got covered up by people being very impressed that, oh my goodness, I actually speak Chinese well enough to function in the world that way. So when I did something socially incorrect, I could actually kind of tell a lot of the time if people thought correctly that I was not Chinese, but spoke, or if they thought incorrectly that I was the child of somebody Chinese and somebody not. Apparently, if I actually get my hair to lie flat, people can mistake. I do occasionally get people thinking, oh, which parent is Chinese or which grandparent is Chinese? None of them. But the expectation of how socially familiar I'm going to be with how it is typically done in any given Chinese area is noticeably different depending on which assumption they make.
Yes, definitely. And I know part of the article you talked about how communication there is much less direct than it is in North America. And there's you had a story about I think it was like a factory worker who, the bicycle story.
Yes.
The bicycles were noisy. And rather than telling the manufacturer that they were noisy, he invited the manufacturer for a bike ride so he could hear about the problem and figure it out for himself.
Yeah. It was hilarious to me watching my classmates come up with the most subtle ways of hinting at the problem they could think of and being told by the teacher that it was still too direct.
Because this is an engineering program, is that right?
I was an engineer. And like my undergraduate majors were mechanical engineering, Chinese, and math. My classmates in this program on that year abroad were primarily not. I believe I was the only STEM person there.
Wow.
So I also had trouble getting my direct enrollment classes because for the others, it was like they were going to take literature or political science, and this was going to be relevant to their major.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, and they said, oh, you can take your electives here in literature or political science. And I said, no, you promised me classes in my major.
Yeah.
This is my major.
So, like, how did you get accommodations for that? Like, this whole episode is going to be accommodations, I think. Were they able to accommodate you so that you could have some electives that you wanted?
Well, the thing is that these electives weren't, oh, I take a class with other students who are in the program. This is, I go take a class at the main university conducted in Chinese with Chinese classmates. Mm-hmm. So all they actually had to do was go talk to the correct department.
Yes.
So because what they had to do was go talk to the correct department, I got to take graph theory. I got to take material science of, God, I have to translate this. Metals and semiconductors.
Okay.
Aphantasia semiconductors.
I'm so glad that you got to take something more of interest to you than literature or political science.
I mean, I like literature, but they promised stuff in my major. And
yeah,
for me, the major point of doing the program was to be able to function professionally in my areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
of course.
I was like, no, math, science, engineering.
There you go with the advocacy. Yeah, like electives are supposed to serve you. Like the elective is supposed to be what you want.
Yeah. So when it comes to the cross-cultural stuff, do you think that that when you are obviously not native in another country, that it is easier to get forgiven for making social mistakes?
It depends.
Yeah.
It is important to this story and how it played out that I was a white person in China.
Mm-hmm.
It would not have played out that way if I were some number of other combinations of foreign in a given country or mistaken for foreign in a given country because of racism, because of power relations.
Yeah.
It is.
That's actually a really important point. In most of the world, it's easier to be a foreign white person than it is to be a foreign person of a different color.
Yes. If you are foreign and racialized, that is going to play out differently
Yeah.
And the story, I like, what I would like is for, regardless of what the reason that the difference is, people get the kind of grace that I got in China.
Mm-hmm.
I would not like it to become everybody gets into the type of trouble that I can get into at home.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would even more not like it to become everybody gets into the kind of trouble that somebody presumed foreign and racialized can get into here in the US.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Because that would be worse. I would like it to be equitable and better.
That is the goal, right?
Agreed.
Now, so I just want to make a connection, because when I read how you wrote about how people accommodated you much more easily, it seemed, much more kindly in China, it reminded me. So I had dated someone once who was Spanish, and I went to a party and everyone else was a Spanish speaker. And I have to say, it was like the one time in my life I didn't feel awkward in a social situation, because the reason I'm not fitting in isn't because I'm autistic. It's because I just don't speak the language. And for me, it was like this sweet relief that I'm not overly analyzing myself, because there was such a valid reason. I put that in air quotes, but like, any miscommunications is just because of the language. And when I read your article, I've just felt like, oh, this I feel this very deeply, this sense of, how in our own language as autistic people around other people, we do carry such such an anxiety about how we are going to be perceived, and the history of our social mistakes are sort of imbued in every interaction that we have.
Yeah.
So
I think for me, I've been in Asia a couple of times. I've been in South Korea and Japan, and being, first of all, white, but not just white, like super pale. I think I got probably the kindest treatment that you can get, because their cultures, both of those cultures, are very fascinated with very light skin. So no matter what I did, even if I made a social mistake, it was just kind of cute.
Interesting.
Which was a very weird situation to be in, because when I make social mistakes at home,
it is not cute.
It's not cute.
Yeah, people have a very different response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it helped that at the time I was blonde as well. So
yes,
double up on like everything Scandinavian, and you put a person in. Yeah. But yeah, of course, if you're a person of color, and especially, I think from what I understand, especially if you're dark-skinned, in those cultures, you might get more prejudice.
Yeah. Unfortunately, so much of the globe, yeah.
The details of what would happen with various other accommodations is not something I think I'm qualified to speak to, but relevant that this was me being a white person in China.
Yeah.
So that you got more grace as a result. Yeah, but it must be interesting. So I find a trait of us autistic people is often that we do like direct communication. So that must be hard in a culture where everything is so polite to the extreme that no one says anything directly. I think I would really struggle.
I mean, no one says anything directly is frankly the case in the US too.
Yeah, I suppose you're right about
you dial it up. Like, in many areas, in many social areas, you dial it up a bit more in China.
Yeah.
There are some areas where you might dial it up a little less, or where you dial it down compared to the US, but it's still, none of it reaches my natural level of, oh, this is not the time for a full frontal smash. I know.
Yeah.
That's actually really relevant. And I think it's relevant globally because our need to be direct and perhaps sometimes overly honest. I think there is barely a culture in the world where that is really that socially accepted.
Yeah.
Like we want to tell the truth. And like I will do it in my job. Like as a psychologist, you have to be so careful with how you say things. And of course, there's definitely clients where you have to
background fire truck.
Yes. I understand.
Yeah, there's certainly clients where you have to like really wrap things up in the way you say it.
In pretty social packages, yes. I know what you mean.
But then there's other clients and of course also friends and stuff where I'm able to say, I'd like to say something a little bit provocative now, or can I push a little right now? Can I say something very direct? And that kind of cushions the blow. But there are so many other cultures where you couldn't do that, and especially towards someone of authority like a teacher or a parent or even just someone older than you.
Yes.
And I know that they certainly do have those social structures in South Korea and Japan that I've visited. Is it the same in China, where it's like age and authority is kind of, you have to be even more careful?
My level of social awareness is insufficient to answer that question.
I love that.
What I do have is, I'm sorry, can you tell me what the proper way to ask blah, blah, blah is?
That is a good phrase.
I don't know how to do it.
That is a good stock phrase to have.
Those. Yeah, it's good to have those little like lines that you can say to kind of say, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help?
Yes, I am sorry.
I'm just a foreigner. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I mean, in many cases, because where there really is an actual script about it, there's a decent chance that it was taught to me.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, I'm doing this well aware that there is not actually a script.
Yeah.
That the thing I am asking them for does not exist, technically.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, there is not a script for me to say, hi, I'm autistic. Kill the flickering light.
If only there were.
But if I ask them for the script to make that request, saying that I'm not from here and don't know what it is, there's a reasonable chance that they will turn off the flickering light.
Wow.
Yeah.
And again, it's like that self-advocacy piece, right? Is preparing in advance. Why do we always have to prepare so far in advance for things? Yeah.
So can I ask about something completely different?
I was just going to
do something totally different.
Yeah.
Because Kara and I have been informed that you have aphantasia. So Can you explain to the audience what that means? What is aphantasia?
So the clinical sciencey description seems to be a lack of conscious visual mental imagery or lack of control of whatever. What I generally say is I don't have a mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm being more casual but talking to sciencey people, I will go, the visual spatial sketch pad for working memory? That sounds extremely fake.
Okay. Yeah.
Because there is no visual.
Now, I've had students with aphantasia, so I'm like learning all the time by proxy from working with them. So my guess, getting a little neuroscience-y, you're more neuroscience-y than me. I'm still like layman's neuroscience-y. My guess is that you would probably learn best through the procedural channel, like doing things, repetition, getting in your body, rather than relying on that working memory piece and like quick access points through visualization.
Visualization is not a thing.
Yeah.
So anything where you say, anytime that you specify through visualization, the answer is no.
So like reading comprehension, when people are like, picture it like a movie in your mind, that would completely not work for an aphant.
That's, to some extent, there are degrees of aphantasia in the sense of aphantasia is talked about as being both very limited mental imagery and as being none.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about somebody for whom it is limited but technically exists, I'm not sure that trying to teach them to use it as a cognitive strategy is going to be helpful, but it might be technically possible.
Yeah.
For me, it's zero. You cannot, you can, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
There will not be a visual, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
The only way that you can make me have a visual is by making the movie for me and putting it in front of me.
Okay. And can you recall that to mind after, if you've seen something?
No.
Or no,
Absolutely
not at all.
not.
Eh? So fascinating.
There is nothing. When people talk about, in so many, like, that staple of grief in fiction, I can't recall their face. I can't picture their face anymore.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Like, I did not have even an intellectual understanding of what that had to do with anything until I understood that most people weren't aphantasiac, and I still don't emotionally grok it.
Yes.
Because I could close my eyes and fail to pull up your faces because that is a visual. I don't have those.
Yes. Well, and it's mind-blowing to me to try and imagine not being able to visualize. Like, I feel like my entire academic success has been by virtue of me being very good at memorizing things on a page, like where they are. I don't have perfect recall like of images, but I've got pretty good. Don't remember people's faces though. So there you go. I have that part, but
yeah.
And so many accommodations for autistic people are based on
using
us
visuals,
being very strong visual thinkers.
I mean, if you put a visual in front of me, I can use it.
Right.
But
Okay,
I'm not going to be able to pull it back up if it's not in front of me. So there is no amount of repetition that will cause me to be able to bring up the visual in my head.
So how do you remember? Sorry.
So, one thing, my declarative memory is extremely good,
Okay.
but a bit overworked.
Of course.
Is trying to do too many things.
Yes.
Because a lot of the information that other people might have as a picture is sitting linguistically in declarative memory.
Which takes way more processing power, than a visual quick.
My declarative memory is very good, and it's very overworked, and these might be relevant, and these statements might be related in that it got good through being used a lot. Neuroplasticity. Other parts of it is that things like motor planning, motor memory aren't visual to begin with.
No,
So
pathway,
my
completely different system.
My motor planning to figure out a new movement for the first time is honestly not great. I'm clumsy as heck.
Me
but
too.
My muscle memory, once I've done it enough times for that to be relevant, is just fine. I can ski, I can ice skate, I can ride a bike. My handwriting is terrible.
Mine too.
But I can type pretty quickly. Part of it is I would probably describe metaphorically as working. So I think most people have, it's not quite two separate monitors, but it's two inputs that both get to plug into the monitor.
Okay.
Or maybe three. There is the input that is coming into your visual system from your eyes. There is input that is coming in from the still visual related circuits for visualization. And there's dream visualization. And these are three different things. Dream visuals get to plug into the monitor for me. My actual eyes get to plug into the monitor. But the stuff that for you would plug into the monitor as visual mental imagery, some of that stuff in my case is still happening. It just doesn't get to plug into the monitor.
Right.
If that makes sense.
You can't kind of pull it up.
Like on demand.
Not even that I can't pull it up. It's that the information therein I still have. Kind of like you can technically use a computer without a monitor. It can be done. You can use it without a mouse too. Like, it's a different skill. And if you lost visualization right now, snap, you wouldn't have that skill yet.
No.
But I grew up using that section of the that section of what my brain does, all without the monitor. So
now, okay, if you were planning like a paper or a project, for me, I usually visualize the end product. I kind of think it through visually. How do you plan?
Are we assuming that I plan?
Okay, and maybe you don't at all. I know another person who's just like, I'm just in the moment. He's like, I sit down to type things and the words come out and I haven't thought about it. Like, he's the most zen person.
I mean, most of my blog posts are, in fact, I just sit down and start writing. My academic papers, there is more planning involved generally, but a lot of it is, but basically what the planning is I know the structure that most journals want: introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. Sometimes discussion and conclusion are mixed together. Sometimes discussion and results are mixed together. But those are the pieces. My preparation is going to be largely around making sure that I have a real good sense of, like, a real good intellectual understanding of what's going into each of these sections. And then, yes, I sit down and start writing.
Okay. And would you say, sorry, go ahead, Maja.
So something completely different, not related to academics, that I'm wondering is, as an aphant, do you ever read fiction? Could you enjoy reading fiction?
Oh my God, I'm such a bookworm.
As a visualizer, I'm playing a movie in my head when I read. And how does that work for you?
I don't know how to describe it to people who think that the way that you enjoy fiction is by seeing it, because what? But yes, I am a bookworm. I like my fiction. I write fiction. Most of it's fan fiction.
Yeah.
I'm active on Archive of Our Own.
Yeah, I can't wrap my head around that either, but
but that's exactly what I thought. Like it's such different ways of
processing information,
of reading, and processing what you're reading and what you're writing as well.
I actually, tangent, I have my student who is an aphant. When I do classroom read alouds, he acts it out they just started acting out the story as I narrate. And it's been the best thing ever, where I'm doing a read aloud. It's a book by an autistic author called, I can't remember, Neverland, maybe. I'll post it in the show notes. And it's a fictional story. And this one particular student just started acting it out one day. And then the classmates started getting involved and they do voices. And it's just such a good way of externalizing what is happening, right? Yeah. Now, I'm curious too. So what do you think teachers can do better to accommodate aphantasia in the classroom?
I think that teaching methods of understanding things can be useful, but specifying what method a person should use to understand something is potentially an issue, especially if what you're specifying is the mode that, as an aphantasiac, I literally cannot do. Like, if you suggest visualization as a possible method that some people will use, that's probably fine. If you tell your students that they need to visualize it and then you ask them about visual details that were now, especially ones that weren't actually specified in the original text, like, well, what does this person look like to you? What color is the blah in your visualization? Oh my God, don't do that. That's the aphantasiac student is going to be looking at you like you have 3 heads.
Yes, that is very relatable, because I've done guided meditations for a long time and then realized the student didn't have visual imagery. I now ask all of my classes and we just do a little survey and I talk about how some people visualize strongly, some people a little bit, some people not at all, and that's okay. And now I have alternatives. Like if I'm doing
How old are your students?
They're 10 to 13 usually.
Okay.
So we talk about it early.
No, at that point, I think that at that age range, I knew that I didn't, and I knew that my mother did, but I still thought she was the weird one.
I think we all feel that way a little bit about our parents. Sorry, Dad, he watches this. No.
No,
I mean,
I have someone in my family as well that doesn't like they just don't enjoy fiction at all because the concept that something that isn't real could be enjoyable, it doesn't click for that person. And I'm the complete opposite. I'm like, give me a fictional world to explore. Yes, I'm so engaged and like
I'm stoked.
Give me all the escapism. Yeah.
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 I mean, that is a different axis than being able to visualize versus not. But but like it is also a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think for this person, it's kind of related. Because I think for them, they do have some mental imagery, but not a lot. And so the idea of like making up a story or imagining something just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I actually, and I've met several other people with aphantasia who, well, I remember one hated reading because unless it was something that they had prior experience with, if it was a context they understood, if it was a setting they understood, otherwise it was just like words on a page, didn't stick, they didn't derive meaning from it. And then others I've met like you who are like, I love to read, I'm a bookworm. So yeah, I guess like those of us who process in one way need to be open to the experiences that other people process in other ways. Right.
But it also really underscores that aphantasia isn't just one thing, and that personality matters just as much.
Mm-hmm. Now, Alyssa, another interesting thing that you mentioned in the article was that research on aphantasia usually really looks to aphants with great respect for their experiences, and that often that's not afforded to autistics in research on autism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much aphantasia research has or will continue to do that, especially the most neuroimaging-y stuff.
Yeah.
But for aphantasia, I think a big part of it is that the lab that named the condition, like the lab that named aphantasia, did so after running, like they did a case study on a guy who started off able to visualize, and then I think it was after a surgery or after a stroke, he couldn't anymore.
Mm.
And then that story got some publicity in more mainstream media rather than academic journals. And they got flooded by people contacting them saying they couldn't visualize either. And that they had never been able to.
And they thought it was hyperbole when people would talk about seeing things.
Yeah. I mean, a true fact on the psych questions when people ask in a screening, do you see things that other people don't? I actually say less than most people.
I love it.
Because I see things that most other people don't notice, autism sensory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Though when it's pointed out, they usually can in fact detect it. It is real in there.
Yes.
But I also don't visualize. And intentional visual imagery is very different from hallucinations that you're not in control of.
Yes.
But they are both falling under the category of seeing something that other people are not seeing.
Yes.
That's true.
Very good point.
And you actually, like, yes, it is possible for someone with aphantasia to hallucinate.
Mhm.
I have not experienced this, but it is a thing that can happen.
That would be very scary after, like, most of your time not having that.
Psychedelics apparently can do that. Also, people with aphantasiacs are not like immune to other neurodivergences that can involve hallucinations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That is interesting.
Wow. Okay, one more classroom-based
I have
question.
1,000 unethical
I know. I was like, what studies
experiments in my head right now.
Research ethics.
Research ethics.
Important.
So I think it's getting towards
One more question.
Okay.
I love to pick people's brains, and I love to get things for my classroom. So do you think it's helpful at all or not helpful at all to teach AFANTs external visualization strategies like mind mapping or like post-it ordering ideas, or do visual methods of organizing ideas work at all? Graphic?
It varies.
Okay, varies.
I'm going to say it is useful to offer.
Yes.
It is not useful to require.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I basically can't.
Yeah. Okay.
But other aphantasia people I know rely heavily on them.
Okay.
Right.
All of that, those kinds of things like mind maps, graphic organizers. I have learned them well enough that if I need to make one to get what is in my head visual for somebody else's benefit, it is slow. It will take me an annoyingly long time.
Yeah.
But I can technically do it.
Okay.
I will never make it on my own account.
Do you have a tip for what else I should offer? Like, I try and teach a wide variety of strategies and say, like, what works for your brain to all of my students, but I might be missing some big ones, right? Just by nature of privileging visualizing myself.
I don't think the proper language exists for what I actually do.
Okay.
Because assumption that everyone's doing it a visual way.
Yes. I needed Dr. Alyssa to change education and come up with some other ways that we can incorporate in elementary and high school.
Oh, too many things. I'm already trying to fix 3 other fields. Help.
Well, I read your bio and it sounds like you're not slowing down anytime soon. So
yes, but I am making some attempt at not adding more research into this. I'm just not
start. It's a good place to start.
Down.
All right, thing of the day.
Yes, I think it's time for thing of the day.
Thing of the day. Well, I've already talked about it a bazillion times. Alyssa wrote an incredible chapter in a book. Let me just pull it up. So the book is called Neurodiversity Studies, A New Critical Paradigm. And I've read the majority of this book, and it has some really awesome chapters and contributions. And Alyssa's chapter, I believe, is chapter 6, Neurodiversity and Cross-Cultural Communication. And it was just such an enjoyable read from beginning to end. It starts with a poem, a multilingual poem, Mandarin and English, and it covers many of the topics we talked about today. It talks about cross-cultural communication. It talks about a little bit about AFANTs. It talks about neuronormative expectations in classrooms. It is a really beautiful, fascinating read, and I highly recommend any of our listeners check it out. Now, I do have one other thing for Thing of the Day that came to me as we were talking. There is a film that came out recently called Spellers, and it follows a number of AAC users who have learned to use letterboards, and some are using computers. And it is just a beautiful film. And one of the questions is why do we not utilize this in schools? Why do we not enable communication that is helping people to express themselves? And again, why do we privilege mouth words? So I will post the link to that. I don't know if it's still available for free, but it is worth paying for. It is an incredible film.
That sounds really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, my first question about the chapter on cross-cultural communication is, what's it like to try to communicate to people who have never been in that situation, what the experience is? Because I find whenever we do research or whenever we do any type of academia, there's this balance of trying to not assume that the reader knows anything, but also not assuming that they're stupid.
So fine. And sorry, and what I wasn't sure. I don't understand the question. So
when you're trying to explain what the experience is of this cross-cultural communication, of being somewhere else and experiencing this, when you're explaining that to someone who's maybe never gone to another country, like,
I've never actually had to explain what it's like to be in another country to somebody who's never been in another country, because there are examples and explanations of that written online. And with the exception of my culture shocking slightly more mildly due to the fact that this is not, oh, it suddenly doesn't make sense, but, oh, it's different nonsense. It is different stuff that doesn't make sense.
yes.
That's,
I like that.
like modulo that, it didn't make sense before. It's just different things that don't make sense now.
And for me, that was a relief. But yeah, I think in general, we're used to having some degree of confusion and anxiety in our every moment of life as autistic people.
So when you went to China, did you already at that point speak Chinese quite well? Or did you more so learn while you were there?
My first time in China, I was 6 years into studying the language. 3 middle school years, 3 high school years.
Right.
So I wasn't anywhere near the level of fluency that would have let me go take a graph theory final in simplified characters without a dictionary.
Right.
But which is what I did at the end of the semester, my first semester that I was in China. But I could get around, I could have a conversation, I could make my own way from Shanghai to Beijing alone without resorting to English.
That's awesome.
And scare my mother because she thought that the study abroad program would have a little bit more supervision than it did.
Oh no.
It was a program where the minimum age was 16.
Right.
Homestays were set up, but most of the people were actual adults. So,
right. Yeah.
If I wanted to run off to another city on a weekend, the rule for that was tell your host family. The rule wasn't don't go, and it wasn't don't go alone.
Yeah.
So I was there for a month. And I went with other students to other places on 2 weekends. I went to Huangshan, beautiful mountain, and Hangzhou, a nearby city with a nice lake, with other people. And I went other places alone. I went to Beijing alone and took the public bus to the Great Wall of China. Yes, you can take public transit to the Great Wall.
Wow.
It is much cheaper than any of the tours.
Yeah, I bet.
That makes sense.
And I also went alone to Xi'an.
Wow. Now,
as a 16-year-old.
Yes.
Wow. Now, how do you feel traveling alone?
It's fine.
I'm so curious because it's like I actually love to travel alone, but I also have high anxiety while I do it. I'm on alert, like so vigilant, like hyper vigilant, but I love to be alone while I travel.
Yes. Like I like traveling alone because I do not need to think about both what do I want to see and keeping track of the people I'm supposed to be with.
And like going to museums, I like to read everything. I like to take my time. You have to kind of match your pace with people if you're traveling with other people. And it's like, there are certain activities I don't want to do with anyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, from your description of what the issue is, I actually might be able to go to a museum with you.
All right, next time we're in the same city, okay? We'll go. No, part of
why I would be able to go to a museum with you is that I suspect you would not be offended if I moved on to a different room and said, all right, I'll meet you up when you're ready. And I suspect that I could also do the same thing of, you go ahead, I'm not done in this one yet.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what, it's so nice when you find someone you're like trip compatible or museum compatible with who understands that. And like, you could just be like, meet you soon. Thanks. Need more time. And I feel a comfort with other autistic people. My boyfriend is autistic, and like we both have that comfort where we can just say like, I need more time. Let me finish this. And I think sometimes if we don't have that trust in people, we don't ask for the things that we need. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I know if you and I were traveling together, Alyssa, I think we would definitely be able to be like, all right, let's part ways for a little while. See you soon.
But I think there is that openness in communication amongst autistic people who know that, you know, each other is autistic. Like when I'm with other autistic people and I know that they're autistic and they know that I'm autistic, automatically those social boundaries fall down. It's when you're with someone and you're kind of like, I think maybe you're autistic, but I don't know if you're autistic. And then you're still kind of trying to do the neurotypical masking thing. And then uncertainties and misunderstandings and stuff. But as soon as anyone is like, oh, by the way, I'm autistic,
the sod drops.
What I have noticed is with people who are also autistic, whether or not it's something that's directly stated, information, like my ability to get my point across tends to be much more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't necessarily mean I like them better. Sometimes it means that I find out much more efficiently why we don't click.
That is a really important point. All autistic people don't necessarily click.
Yeah.
But there is also a risk if they don't have if they still have the neurotypical filter up at least a little bit, if they interpret me through, like if they interpret something I said through the neurotypical filter,
yes,
that can be a source of miscommunication, even if we're both autistic. Like, a friend of mine was coming to campus once for some reason other than me and was like, oh, would you like to join us for lunch? This was like 2014, 2015, I think. Maybe even earlier. I was still working with one of the undergrad research people. And I said, I have a research meeting I can't. And then the research meeting got canceled. I told him the research meeting got canceled. And he was very confused when I then showed up, because apparently neurotypicals will say, I would like to, but XYZ I can't. And it means they don't want to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas I would like to, but XYZ I can't. XYZ got canceled.
No,
I can do the thing.
The neurotypical filter is a good thing to acknowledge too, because we do so often get used to reading into subtext or being like, what did they really mean as a neurotypical person? Because they always add subtext. That then when we're speaking with one another, and especially if we don't know we're both autistic or have that comfort factor, we might try and do that as well, right? And then misunderstand what someone is actually saying.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say subtext is a thing that I think most people do, autistic or not. But autistic subtext and neurotypical subtext are not the same subtext.
They're not. It's like reading different subtitles completely.
No.
Background fire truck from a neurotypical might be in, the subtext might be, I'm sorry, you might hear some background noise from my end. The autistic subtext of background fire truck is, I'm going to cover my ears now and I'm not hearing anything you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Until it's over.
Yeah, sensory pain and agony too.
Yes, they both have subtext. It's just different subtext.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we are maybe out of time.
Okay.
That is possible.
Perfect.
So to our audience, thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and you can follow me at Maja Todale on various social media, and you can follow Kara Diamond at
Dr. Kara Diamond.
And Alyssa, do you have anywhere that you would like to share for people to follow your stuff?
I am Yes That Too on both Blogspot and Tumblr. I'm also Yes That Too, but there's an underscore somewhere in there on Twitter. And I am not going to attempt to recite the URL of my Google Scholar profile, because that just sounds like a terrible life decision. But I do have one if you want to find my researchy stuff.
Send me your links. I'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put them in the description. And
cool.
Yeah, everyone, please do the social media stuff, share, follow,
subscribe,
comment, do the things.
All the things. Well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Alyssa, for being here with us today and just blowing our minds with aphantasia and some really stellar insights too in about AAC. And I just really am delighted about this conversation.
Yay. Brains are cool. I like brains.
Me too.
I have a PhD in how much we don't understand brains.
Oh my gosh. I need to pick your brain even more about that. All right.
Maybe we'll need to do another another episode sometime on how much we don't understand brains.
I love
All
that.
right.
All right, we'll have you back sometime. Thanks
All
so
right.
much. Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Bye. See ya.
Autistic tidbits of